Isn't that something else? That mosaic they just found. In Turkey, right?
Oh, yeah, the banquet scene.
Yeah, it's Roman, apparently.
Yeah.
Just amazing, the stuff they're still pulling out of the ground. Makes you want to get your hands dirty, you know?
Speaking of, that's what we're digging into today, but figuratively, not with trowels.
Right. Archaeology careers.
Yeah.
The real deal, not just treasure hunting like in the movies.
And thankfully, we've got something better than a dusty old map to guide us.
RoleCatcher, right. Their guide for archaeologists' careers. I gotta admit, I was surprised how in-depth it was.
It's really practical. Rollcatcher is used for actual job hunting, interviews, all that, so their take on archaeology is going to be super relevant for anyone actually considering it, which I appreciate.
No kidding. So what was your biggest takeaway? I mean, before reading this, I have to admit, I had a bit of an Indiana Jones image in my head.
Oh, they shut that down right away.
Uh,
It's not about digging up treasure. The guide emphasizes that the real focus is understanding past societies,
yeah.
how they were structured, what they believe, their whole deal.
It's like piecing together a giant puzzle, but instead of a picture, you're revealing an entire civilization.
Exactly. And speaking of putting the pieces together, the guide goes into how high-tech archaeology has become. Forget shovels and brushes. It's all 3D analysis and digital modeling now.
No kidding. So instead of just brushing off a pot, you could create a digital model, zoom in on every detail, maybe even virtually reassemble it if it's broken.
Exactly. It's like giving these objects a second life in the digital world. But even with all the tech, the guide makes it clear that fieldwork is still a huge part of archaeology. And it's not always glamorous.
Yeah, no kidding. The pros and cons section doesn't sugarcoat it. It can be physically demanding, remote locations, crazy weather.
Yeah, it takes a certain type of person, that's for sure. And it's not without its risks either. The guide even mentioned encountering hazardous materials in the field.
Hazardous materials like what? I mean, we're talking about ancient ruins, right?
Well, think about it. You're excavating a site that's been buried for who knows how long. You could encounter anything from unstable structures to, I don't know, maybe lead paint in some old tomb or something.
Wow. It's not just about uncovering the past. It's about navigating the present to get there.
Yeah.
Talk about a challenge.
Definitely. But I think that element of risk is also part of the appeal for a lot of people drawn to archaeology, when you say.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That sense of adventure, of literally unearthing the unknown, it's exciting. And for someone with that learner personality, it's a perfect fit.
Right.
But the guide also mentioned something I hadn't considered, customer service skill.
Customer service.
Yeah, for archaeologists. What do you think that's about?
That's interesting. It probably has something to do with working with all the different groups involved, like local communities or government agencies or even the media.
Right, you're not just digging stuff up. You've got to be able to explain it, share the significance of it.
Exactly. You're telling a story, really. The story of the past brought to life for the present.
So it's not just about digging. You've really got to know your stuff.
Yeah.
And the guide gets into the nitty-gritty of the skills and knowledge needed. Some of it's a no-brainer, like obviously you need a strong history background, but then they mentioned reading comprehension. And I'm thinking, okay, everyone needs that, right? What's so special about it for archaeology?
Well, you're not just reading reports or research papers. Imagine deciphering ancient texts or inscriptions on pottery shards, trying to make sense of a language that might not have been spoken for centuries.
Whoa! Yeah, that's next-level reading comprehension for sure. You'd almost have to be a mind reader. Speaking of minds, the guide also talks about critical thinking.
Right, and not just in the usual sense. I mean, you're constantly gathering evidence, analyzing data, but it's all fragmented. You're piecing together a puzzle where half the pieces are missing, and you don't even know what the picture is supposed to be.
Talk about a challenge. It's like
Oh.
you're not just uncovering the past, you're almost having to invent it based on what little you find.
Exactly. You have to be able to think critically, connect the dots, and be open to different interpretations.
And then on top of all that, the guide says speaking skills are essential. Now that surprised me. Why is being a good speaker so important for an archaeologist? I mean, it's not like they're giving TED Talks every day, are they?
Well, they might be. Seriously, though, think about it. You've made this incredible discovery, but you've got to be able to share it, whether it's presenting findings at a conference, collaborating with international teams, or even just explaining to the public why this dusty old pot is actually super significant.
So it's not enough to just uncover the past. You've got to bring it to life for others. Which makes me think about the actual career paths within archaeology. It's not all just digging in the dirt, right?
Not at all. The guide does a fantastic job of outlining different career stages, from entry level to, seasoned expert.
Yeah.
And it's not always a linear path either.
Yeah, the guide mentioned a junior archaeologist who specializes in 3D analysis. They actually started in computer science before realizing their passion for history and archaeology.
It's a great example of how diverse the field is becoming. And speaking of diversity, the guide actually spends a good chunk of time talking about alternative job titles and career paths for people with archaeological training.
Because those skills translate, right? It's
hmm
not just about knowing how to excavate a site. It's problem solving, critical thinking, communication, all that good stuff that's valuable in any field.
Exactly. So even if someone decides fieldwork or academia aren't for them, they could end up as museum curators, historical researchers, cultural heritage consultants. The possibilities are pretty vast.
Wow. It's like archaeology equips you with a unique set of tools that you can use to tackle all sorts of challenges. But one thing the guide emphasizes throughout is the importance of ethics. And I gotta admit that hadn't really crossed my mind before.
It's huge, though, right? Because archaeologists aren't just digging up artifacts. They're unearthing stories, cultures, beliefs, things that have shaped our world. There's a lot of responsibility that comes with that.
So it's not just about what you discover, but how you go about it. What are some of the ethical considerations archaeologists face?
Oh, tons. For example, there's the whole question of ownership. Who owns the past? How do we balance preserving a site with making it accessible for research or even public viewing? And how do we ensure we're respecting the cultural beliefs and traditions of descendant communities?
Yeah, and those are some big questions. It makes you realize archaeology isn't just about the past, it's about navigating complex issues in the present.
Exactly. And that's where organizations like ICOMOS come in, the International Council on Monuments and
I
Sites.
think I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah, they set standards and guidelines for ethical archaeological practices worldwide. They're kind of like the guardians of our shared heritage, making sure sites are protected and research is done responsibly.
So it's a global effort. It's not just about one country or one culture's past. It's about our collective history.
Absolutely. And speaking of our collective history, we often break archaeology down into specific areas like prehistoric archaeology or classical archaeology, even underwater archaeology. But it's all interconnected in the end.
Okay, now you've got me really curious about those specializations. I mean, it's one thing to talk about archaeology broadly, but I'm fascinated by the different paths you can take. So let's dive into those specializations, shall we? Let's start with the classic, prehistoric archaeology. I mean, who isn't fascinated by the idea of uncovering the earliest traces of human history?
Right. It's mind-blowing. Every new discovery seems to rewrite what we thought we knew about our ancestors.
Like those recent findings about Neanderthals. Turns out they weren't the simple brutes we always pictured.
Exactly. They were making art, using complex tools. It's changing everything. And then there's classical archaeology, which has always captured the imagination.
Oh yeah, the Romans, the Greeks talk about leaving a mark on history. Makes you want to hop on a plane and start digging, doesn't it?
Well, I'm heading to Greece next month for a dig, actually. But it's amazing to think those civilizations, as well studied as they are, still hold so many secrets.
It's like their stories are still unfolding, even after all this time. And speaking of stories, what about underwater archaeology? Now that's a whole other level of adventure. Sunken cities, shipwrecks swallowed by the sea. It's like something out of a movie.
It really is, and the technology they're using these days is incredible. They've got robots mapping the ocean floor, divers carefully excavating delicate artifacts. It's like exploring another planet, only it's right here on Earth.
And it just goes to show that archaeology is constantly pushing boundaries, finding new ways to uncover the past.
Exactly. What we think is impossible today might be commonplace tomorrow, which is what I love about this field. There's always something new to discover, always another mystery to solve.
It's a good reminder to never stop questioning, never stop exploring. Because who knows what incredible secrets are still out there just waiting to be unearthed.
Exactly. And, even if a career in archaeology isn't in the cards, there are so many ways to engage with the past. Visit a museum, read a book, or even just take a walk and imagine the history beneath your feet.
Those are great ideas. It's about staying curious, about keeping that sense of wonder alive. And ultimately, that's what archaeology is all about.
It's not just about digging up the past, it's about understanding ourselves better, connecting with our shared human story, and maybe even learning a few lessons along the way.
Well said. And on that note, we're going to wrap up this incredible deep dive into the world of archaeology.
Thanks for having me. It's been a blast chatting with you today.
The pleasure was all mine. And for our listeners, we hope this has sparked your curiosity and inspired you to explore the wonders of archaeology a little further. Thanks for listening.